So we're going to be building the FG self-locking differential. You can see everything's laid out smoothly. So what I will do is I'm going to begin just briefly showing, before you get things going, you want to get the bevel gears installed and make sure that they operate smoothly. During the video you'll see that I actually did mess this up originally, so I had to take it all apart. So make sure that the side plates and the bevel gears operate correctly. So first thing is that you can see is that you want to hold in the side plates with the little screw. You'll put in the friction plate with the side bevel gears, get everything lined up, make sure that the gears spin smoothly, and then you'll put in that dowel pin across so you can see that that's operating correctly. So what we're moving to is you've got a couple of little shims, and the shims you want to put behind the friction plate, and what you can see me doing there is just kind of using a screw to help move those around in place. So this dowel pin in the middle, you're going to be building all the different pieces. So you've got thrust bearings that you need to assemble. There's a little groove that faces inward. There's the ball race that goes on next. The next piece again is the thrust bearing, making sure that the groove goes towards the bearing. The next piece is going to be a tapering disc, so it just helps put pressure to make it adjustable for when the diff engages. So you want to put the cone shape towards the center, as you can see, so that stacks up. The next thing that you'll do is you'll do the exact same thing in reverse. So you're going to put another pressure disc on, and then another thrust bearing assembly. So again, you've got the washer with the groove that faces the race of the ball bearing, and then the second washer. And that's how it should look. So from here I'll put in the other friction plate. Make sure that slides in easily. Install the shim. So it just slips in between. Then I just use an Allen wrench to just kind of help line it up before pushing the pin all the way through. And then I found that it helped to just kind of give it a little light tap to make sure that that flushes, goes in flush with the case of the differential. Then you want to check your gear assemblies, make sure that they spin freely. So the next thing is I will just install the other screw. You want to use a little bit of blue removable thread lock here, and that's for that's for the side stop plate is what those are called. So you want to check the assembly, make sure that it spins correctly. Now there's two O-rings. There's a larger O-ring and a smaller O-ring. The large O-ring goes towards the square plate on the side. The small O-ring is on the opposite side. And then for this, I use the FG all-purpose grease. I found that it's a little bit easier to use a glove because it's a little bit of a messy job. So you just want to make sure that the thrust bearing is coated, that the gears are coated, that the friction plate's coated. So I just found it easier to use some gloves to get that all the way through. So just keep adding grease until you don't want it to be completely packed full, but you want to make sure that there's enough coating all pieces, and you'll feel, especially as you get a little bit of the grease on the friction plates, it smooths up quite a bit. Now there's a little screw here on the side. That's the screw that you want to pay attention to, because you've got your collar and there's some heat shrink tubing that goes over that collar before you install it. So yeah, that little hole that was there that's threaded, I think it's for manufacturing purposes. So you'll want to align the collar, make sure that it slides on, make sure that you have that heat shrink tubing up there. From here I'll just wipe off any of the excess grease that was on those O-rings, so you can see where you want the screw holes to line up. Now the next thing that I do is I just usually put a little bit of blue thread lock just on a plastic bag, because I find it's a little easier to dip the screws in. So these are the adjusting screws, so they go in, and what I found is for my base starting point, I just went to, on these adjusting screws, you can adjust the tension of the differential, so like when it locks up. So I just went in and then went flush to the case of the differential, and then I'll adjust it from there. This is just a retaining screw and a washer, and this goes on the end with the bearing, not on the end with the gear. So just again a little bit of blue thread lock, and this just keeps that the collar of the differential, or the socket as FG calls it, keeps it from sliding off. So make sure those are snug. And then what I use is I just use a lighter to shrink that heat shrink tubing. And then lastly, you want to install the screws that hold the main differential gear onto the diff. So again, a little bit of blue thread lock is all it takes. And then you want to tighten those in a cross pattern. So from here, what we're going to do is we're going to now assemble the ball drive axles. And this is going to be helpful working over a towel, because there's a lot of small pieces that would bounce and get lost everywhere. So you've got the axles that just slip into the differential, and they're notched a little bit, so you'll just find it where it'll slide right in. And there you go. So these adjusting screws, I went in one full turn from flush with the alloy socket, and you can adjust those later to how you prefer for them to run. But you just want to make sure that the differential operates smoothly. So the differential's done, it's finished. And what we'll do now is we're going to assemble the ball drive axles. So again, I've got some gloves. You want to grease the end of the dog bone, and you want to grease the end of the boot. This will keep the boot from tearing when you're stretching it over the axle. And so put a little bit of grease on the outside, a little bit of grease on the inside. And the first one is pretty simple. You just pull it straight over. And these are a bit tight, but that's what the grease helps for, is it keeps it from tearing. Now the other one, it's a little bit easier to kind of pull it over inside out. Again, you want to make sure that there's plenty of grease on that so that it doesn't tear. And then you just pull the boot over the ball. So that keeps the protective dog bone boot from tearing and holds everything in and helps the grease stay. So this next trick is pretty nice. This is what I do to, so you got these little pressure springs. Just a little dab of grease is all it will take, and it will hold itself in place in that drive cup so it doesn't fall out. And then what you want to do, this is another trick to keep those little balls from falling out, is put some grease on the dog bone, because that's what will hold the drive balls in place. And then take an Allen wrench, dip it in the grease, and then you can actually pick up the small ball bearings and just push them right in place, and the grease will hold them in place. So there's 3 on each side. Make sure that they're greased well. And then on what I found when I was assembling my EVO competition was that there was a bit of binding happening, and it was with the tolerances of the brake on the rear stub axle carrier. There's a little bit of movement, and so what I ended up doing was I removed the square drive hub, I removed the disc brake, and found where it was binding. And so this is the important kind of thing that you have to do when you're assembling your EVO car, is just check for binding, check for smooth operation. Every single screw on this back assembly has to come out to get thread locked anyway, and you'll want to use some blue thread lock on here. And so what we'll have is, just tighten that up, make sure that everything's lined up smoothly. But yeah, what I ended up finding was that between the square hub where it was installed on the stub axle, it wasn't spinning freely, and the caliper, how it mounted on the back rear hub carrier, also wasn't spinning freely. So what you'll do is you'll first loosely install these screws, get everything aligned properly where you can feel that the disc brake isn't dragging at all on that rear caliper. So you see, I'll hold it in place to where it's aligned correctly, because you've got a little bit of movement with machine parts. So I want to make sure that it spins free and that it's not dragging, and then you'll do your final torquing. So you can see everything spinning smoothly without any bind. I also found that my rear differential bulkhead caps were installed backwards on the top. So it's just one of those things. This is why you have to take the entire car apart. So you can see I'm removing the rear shock tower and the rear bulkhead for the differential caps, removing the shocks. All of these screws that I'm taking out are going to get pulled anyway to get a little bit of blue thread lock on them, so it's no big deal to undo these, swap out the left for the right, which, like I said, mine was, it was just pre-assembled wrong, so you just had to flip those one side to the other. So everything's getting a good bit of blue thread lock, and it's easy to just use it puddled up on a bag, so you can just dip the screw in rather than try to individually apply it to every screw. And I do one side at a time because you've got different adjustments for your roll center, and you want to make sure that it ends up in the same spot. So from here, you're going to install the ball drive axles, and then push the boot up and over that differential cup, and make sure that the boot is fully seated. From here, you'll slip it into the bulkhead on the chassis. You'll line up the boots for the stub axles, install those. And then again, with all these machined aluminum parts, you want to very carefully reinstall things. You don't want to over tighten anything until all the screws are loosely installed and that everything's lined up correctly. And then when you have screws like these bulkheads, you want to do a cross pattern when you tighten so that everything's lined up smoothly. And then from here you'll reattach your rear camber links, get them all tightened, check it out, everything's smooth. So that is installing the differential in your FG EVO 2020. If you have any questions or if you need any clarification, please leave a comment. You can email us at sales@davesmotors.com. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more.